Still something to reach up the front here.
It was good to be back.
Still something to reach up the front here.
It was good to be back.
That was the YouTube tab of my computer. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. Sorry for starting a bit late. For those watching at home, we've got a very full room tonight. It was great to see everyone mingling to start with, so we thought we'd keep that going just a little bit longer. As always, I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. As always, a bit of housekeeping. So, hey, I'm Zach, and we've got Kristian in the middle there. We help run CocoaHeads. Any questions, issues, concerns, or anything tonight, please come and speak to one of us. As always, a massive thank you to Billu, our sponsor. Without them, tonight wouldn't happen. We're obviously in their offices, and it's a great space. And they also help cover our other ongoing costs throughout the month. So we're really appreciative to Billu for their support. Now, a reminder that CocoaHeads has a code of conduct. It's very detailed. You can read it on the website in full, but it boils down to 3 key points, and they are to be respectful, be inclusive, and be aware. If you notice any issues tonight, or if you'd like to speak about any issues, please come and see myself or Kristian, and we'll address that. A reminder, we have a Slack community, so everyone's welcome to join. It could be a good place to chat throughout the month. It's a little bit quiet these days, but we can get it going again. There's also a jobs channel for anyone who's looking for work or looking to hire. So it can be worthwhile being in and around the Slack community. Now, hands up if you're a first-time attendee. It's a huge, big welcome. Round of applause. Great to see so many new faces. We hope you enjoy it. We hope you live up to the expectations. But yeah, welcome and great to have you. Now, if you like what you see here tonight, as always, there's Melbourne CocoaHeads that could be worth checking out as well. So we run on the 3rd Thursday of the month. They run on the 2nd Thursday of the month. That's usually a week before. And they have a great live stream. Definitely recommend checking them out if more of this kind of content interests you. Now, a call out to some conferences that are happening. So we've got DevWorld combined with XWorld, which is another conference run by the same organization. So DevWorld is the sort of iOS Swift focus track of this conference. It's happening in Melbourne at the end of the month. It's very exciting. It's great to have the conference back after a few years. And we've also got a new conference in Chicago for sort of focused on Swift development called Deep Dish Swift, and that's happening a month later at the end of April. I was hoping to be able to sneak WWDC into these slides tonight, but that hasn't been announced yet, but could be any day now, so just have to wait and see. Now, looking ahead, we have another event later this month. So normally we do one meetup a month, but this month we have a special event, and it's actually because of the DevWorld conference, which is happening later in the month. We've got a couple of speakers who are going to be in town for it, and they're volunteered to give talks. We couldn't fit them all into tonight's event, and so we have a couple of great talks lined up. That event is on the 28th, and it's happening right here. So Billu are kind enough to sponsor that one as well. If you'd like to attend, details and RSVP are on Meetup. And of course, we'll be back as normal in April. So that date is the 20th. I've got a couple of talks lined up for that night as well. But as always, we are looking for talks. So if giving a talk in a future month interests you, please send myself a message, send Kristian a message, and we'll be happy to work with you to make that talk happen. So tonight's schedule, housekeeping, that's what I'm doing right now. Almost done, I promise. And we've got our first talk by Kristian on ChatGPT and our second talk from Amy. Now, before I finish, is anyone looking for work or is anyone hiring and they'd like to give a quick plug? No, you just stood up.
Well, I mean, Billu is always hiring. Right now for senior people, backend people. So, and also someone with SAP competencies. So, if that's you.
Kristian? Anyone else looking for work or hiring?
We're looking for someone with 10 years GPT experience.
That's only you, right? Cool. All right. Well, if anyone has anything pops up throughout the month, feel free to post about it on Slack in that jobs channel. But right now, I'll hand over to Kristian.
Cool. That's all connected.
Right.
How's my hand? Coming up?
Maybe you go out.
Very joyful.
Oh, there it is. Cool.
Awesome. CocoaHeads. Wow, what a great turnout we have today. First of all, I just wanted to apologize that I've been kind of slack with the community. This is my first time attending physically since lockdowns began. So yeah, I've been very slack to the community, but hopefully 2023 I can find a bit more time to contribute back to the community. And yeah, again, thanks to the sponsors, Below, for providing the space as well. Cool, we already had one of these, but I'll do another one as well. Just wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. So I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Just a bit about myself. I've been working in mobile pretty much my entire career. I was very lucky in that I graduated just as the iPhone came out, and that just somehow worked out for me in terms of timing. So been working on quite a few like interesting mobile apps and projects in general. So if you want to chat, you can hit me up on Twitter. All right, this is what we're all here for today, right? And ChatGPT build my app for me. I can see a lot of very nervous faces here from the engineers. This is a topic that I've been very like passionate and been doing a lot of research about recently, and I've been speaking to a lot of people on this topic recently. And whenever I speak to someone on this topic, I can sense that there's either one or two very strong emotions. People are either very excited or fearing for their life. And so I just wanted to get like a bit of a sense from the crowd here. If you're more excited than fearful about ChatGPT, put your hand up if you're more excited. Okay, so maybe like 60%. And if you're more fearful,
Can you
no,
roll?
it's okay. It's okay to be afraid. I go through these emotional swings myself when I'm playing with this tool, and I see some incredible things that it can do. I just like fear of like, you know, what the world's going to be in 5 years. So I think it's very natural for us to go through those emotions of kind of being scared of what this thing can do. But it was interesting to see like how how everyone here feels as well. So I started playing around with ChatGPT around like November last year, and I first saw a lot of tweets appearing. Everyone was talking about ChatGPT, and I was initially dismissing it. I was like, oh, this like language model, like what could it be possibly good for? And then there was this one tweet that really caught my eye and just made me start experimenting with it. Someone said that with zero programming knowledge, they managed to build a working website and get it live in production in 1 day. And they had never programmed before. And when I read that tweet, I was like, okay, that's a bit different. Like, wow, okay. And these days, you go onto platforms like YouTube and you can see, everyone's basically saying like, hey, you can build all these amazing things just using ChatGPT. And so the logical question for me, as someone who's been in mobile for my entire career over the past decade, can ChatGPT, first question that came to mind is, can ChatGPT enable non-engineers to produce high quality apps? So like all these things that people are promising in the YouTube videos and that people are claiming in the community, like, is this really a thing? And so I decided to give it a bit of a whirl. So simple task that I tried to go through as an exercise to try to build a simple GitHub client, which basically just, you can log into GitHub, you can see a list of like trending repositories, you can see your starred repositories, just something relatively straightforward and vanilla. So can ChatGPT do this for me? And so the exercise that I went through was to try to role play try to pretend that I don't have any programming experience. Let's say, for example, I'm like a business BA in a company, and I've never programmed. I don't know technical jargon. I don't know things about programming languages, but I know that our company wants to build a website. So if I'm like a non-technical BA and I wanted to build this out, like what types of things might I be putting into the prompt here? And so I thought, well, I don't know anything about programming languages, so I can't really guide it in terms of what type of language I want. I don't really know anything at this stage about UI frameworks, so I can't say like, give me something in UI kit or give me something with this particular approach. And I don't really know anything about design patterns, so I can't say like, hey, give me a model or give me a view model or something like that. So in this exercise, I'm just going to ask very simple things. So like, give me iOS app code that connects to the GitHub API and displays a list of popular repositories. So this is a question that we can imagine a business BA would try to put into the prompt with no knowledge of programming. And we'll see what we get out. So we get a view controller, which has a function to fetch repositories. It understands the specific endpoint it needs to go to fetch repositories from GitHub. It's using JSON decoder, so it's understanding that it needs to put things in models and decode them. But there's a little bit of an unfortunate thing here in that it's going down an approach of using Storybook and visual UI, which you can't really do in text. So this kind of leads me down like a really unfortunate path, but we'll see where it goes. But let's say, for example, I don't know any better, and it's like, okay, I'm BA, this bot told me this is the path I need to go down, so let's continue down that path. So I say the screen should have a title of that should be trending, and the app should have 4 tabs: home, notifications, explore, profile. The screen that we just built should be the explore screen. So it's given me out some like blank view controllers which don't really have anything in them, but that's okay. Then it's given me a tab bar controller, and it's actually like put like titles against the tabs. Okay, so we've got a bit of a tab bar controller set up there, but again, still we're working with like IV outlets and stuff like that, which is very unfortunate at this stage, but that's the route that it's taking us. So, okay, the list of repositories should include the author, an avatar of the author, description of the repository. So I'm just like giving it a bit more details now and what I want to see from the list. And so it gives me a table view setup. And so it doesn't go about setting up a lot of like separation of concern at this stage. It's just like dumping everything in the view controller, but that's okay because I don't know any better at this stage. But okay, it's setting up a table view. And then I ask it like, okay, can you show me the code for this repository table view cell, because it's referencing this thing that it hasn't actually shown me the code for. So if I try to run this, it'll just complain. It's like, well, where is this cell? Say, okay, can you give me the code for this cell? And it's gone ahead and again, like still using IV outlets and Storybook style for creating the views, but it's like giving me a lot, right? And if someone showed me this code and said that they had never programmed in their whole life, I was like, okay, you've got like a table view cell with all of these outlets defined. You're using things like prepare for reuse. Like I'd be like, okay, we just made a really good hire. Like this person is onto something. Like this is their first day of programming. That's pretty impressive. Okay, so the profile screen should have a login button and allow the users to log into their GitHub account. And so, okay, it gives me the profile screen. It doesn't really give me any logic. It's like, okay, there's a login button tapped. It hasn't given me any view. construction, unfortunately. And it's like, okay, you do, you fill in the blanks for the login button tab, but I don't know how to program. So can you do it for me? So can you add the logic for login button tapped? And then it starts fleshing things out. So it's like, okay, we're going to go through the OAuth flow with GitHub. We're going to be sending users, into Safari, and we've got like a client ID and a client secret that we need to manage. And again, I haven't written a single line of code yet, right? I'm just prompting, and I'm not speaking technical jargon, right? I'm just pretending to be a business BA, right? And look at how far we've got so far. Okay, add the code to capture the authentication state to the user after they've returned from the web experience. And so it's starting to give me some of the scaffolding, but this is where it was starting to really struggle in terms of like putting everything together. But the fact that I was able to get this far, pretending that I had absolutely zero knowledge of programming, was like a pretty interesting experience, to say the least, that I could actually get this far. Because like, the scaffolding is there for a bunch of screens. The scaffolding is there for making API calls, or potentially storing authentication tokens as well. And so at the end of that little quick exercise, can ChatGPT enable non-engineers to produce high quality iOS apps? To have a bit of a think about it. And I guess another translation of that same question is, are they coming to take our jobs, right? Is there, if we fast forward, like, is there still going to be a world with software engineers and iOS engineers and all this stuff? And my simple answer to that off the back of this experiment is no, they're not coming to take our jobs, because in going through that whole example, first of all, it gave me like IB outlets, and it was it was working with like nib files and storybook and stuff. And like, can you imagine a business BA trying to put together like views in Interface Builder and hooking up the outlets? Like, this is basically what you'd see, and you'd probably be able to hear their screen from the other side of the planet. So with that example alone, I don't think that like we're quite there yet of like someone who hasn't programmed at all to put all of that stuff together and produce a high quality app just yet. But I was assuming someone who has absolutely no experience, right? That's like throwing, a person into a cage full of lions, right? It's not really a fair fight. So these days, it's very common that a company would send their employees on some sort of course. Like, we're about to build this awesome iPhone app. Let's send you, and you off to some iOS course for 5 days, and you're going to learn some basics, right? You're going to learn a bit about the programming language. You're going to learn about UI frameworks. You're going to know the differences between Swift UI and UIKit. You're going to understand some basic design patterns, right? So you're going to go through like this very intense 5-day course, and you're going to know a few things. So let's like try to repeat that same exercise. So we know a few things about iOS now. So instead of asking very blank, like very generic questions, like, hey, give me an iOS app code, I'm going to be a lot more specific. I'm going to say, give me a Swift UI view and a view model. I'm going to tell it, use MVVM. I'm going to say the screen should fetch a list of popular Swift repositories from the GitHub API. It should use async await and store the data in codable structs. So these are all things that I've learned now on my 5-day course that my company has sent me on. And I say, okay, each of the items in the list that it returns should be in a separate repository, because on my course, I learned about separation of concerns. So now I can give it much more, meaty requirements. So let's see what we get back. So this is a lot more useful, right? So we've got a view model, which is using combine. Unfortunate that it doesn't import combine, but that's something that we can fix very easily. It's making the API call. It's set me up with my codable structs based on the API response. And keep in mind here, I never actually gave it the JSON, right? So it understood the shape of the models, which is quite fascinating. It's given me a SwiftUI view, which has a navigation view. It's got the list that I asked for, and it's got the repository row as well. So this is, okay, we're starting to get somewhere now, right? And so just putting these into files and running Xcode, I've actually got a list of repositories, and clicking on any of these items takes me to the web view to see the details. And I haven't written a single line of code yet. So the app should have a tab view and the following tabs: Home, Notifications, Explorer, Profile. The tabs should use SF symbols that are appropriate for each of those tab names. The screen that was just displayed, the screen that was just created, GitHub view, should be the Explore tab. And so it's given me a tab view. And what's fascinating here is it picked really, really good icons for the tabs. So it picked the house for home, it picked the bell for notifications, it picked the compass, the Safari one for Explore. And what I kind of find fascinating about this is the icon for Explore is Safari. Like that's the compass icon, but somehow it knows like, hey, like a compass is good for Explore, even though it's actually called Safari. So that one was really eye-opening. Okay, so we're starting to make more progress, right? We've got a tab view, we've got some icons being displayed. We're starting to get places. So it's starting to look, starting to get to a bit more towards what we're trying to accomplish, right? Okay, so each of the repository rows should contain an image of the repository, the name of the repository, the number of stars. I'm just giving it more details now because all it gave me before was just the name of the repo. And so here it struggled a little bit with some things. So it gave me some code which wasn't compiling for a number of reasons. But what was interesting about this was I could tell it like, hey, like you gave me this code and it doesn't actually work because you're trying to modify something that's not mutable. And it's like, oh, actually, sorry, you're correct. And it updated that code. So just based on this error message, I was able to say like, hey, you can't actually do that. And so it's updated the code. But then with the updated code, there was a little error as well in that it was trying to perform operations on the repositories array before actually assigning it, which was a bit unfortunate, but something that you can pick up very quickly in runtime, right? You can just run the app and it'll crash, right? So in less than 30 minutes spent, we ended up with a screen looking like this, where I have a tab view, I've got appropriate icons being used for tabs, I've got my correct screen that's being displayed when the Explore tab is selected. I've got a list of repositories. Each of them have an image, which is, its approach to actually loading that image was very good. It had like an animation loader as well, so it was handling them nicely. We've got number of stars and contributors, and these have appropriate icons as well. I didn't tell it that stars should be a star and that contributors should be this icon. It just, that's what it picked. And I couldn't have picked better icons. Like, incredible. And yeah, there were a number of little bugs that needed to be solved, but a lot of them were ones that actually were caught at compile time as well. So I could very easily troubleshoot. And so I was going through this exercise of like coming up with these slides and this material as I was watching Formula One qualifying. It was 2 weeks ago. So I just spent like an hour and a half while qualifying was running just to see like, okay, how far can I get with this type of experiment? And again, I wasn't pretending to be an expert. I was pretending to be someone who's just had like a handful of days in understanding iOS. And where I got to at the end of qualifying of the Formula One was I've got my profile screen. I can log in with GitHub and it's like actually working. Like the login is working. I'm storing my access token securely in the keychain. So it created a keychain service for me. And I didn't write a single line of code for that. I just said like, give me a keychain service that I can use to store auth tokens and stuff. It's fetching my user details. It's fetching the repositories. It's persisting state. So if I close the app and relaunch it, it knows that, hey, I'm an authenticated user. And there were only a handful of lines of code that I needed to do by hand, right? So it's a pretty compelling like situation to be in while I was basically eating Doritos and watching Formula One, right? Like, I don't think I would have been able to do that same thing, just writing it all by hand and enjoying a race of motorsport, right? And so there were some pretty interesting moments that kind of caught my eye when I went through that exercise. One was, as I was like building out the profile screen and such, I gave it the JSON payload of like what we were fetching as we were getting the user's profile. So I said, here's the JSON payload, just convert it into Swift codable structs for me, please. And he just did it all. So just like not even formatted or anything, I just gave it the JSON data. And it's like, okay, give me my Swift code. And yeah, they did it. There were some unfortunate things here in that it couldn't quite tell which ones were optional, which ones were required. So if I'd log in with a different user, which doesn't have certain attributes, the app would crash. But just changing a lot of these to optionals or some default values or something, fix that. And this one was really fascinating for me as well, in that, so I've given it a little VStack, and I said, update this view to use some appropriate SF symbols. And I want the icons to be on the left of each of the text labels. And so he updated that. And so it gave me this view where I have like a little icon on the left of each of the labels. And yeah, I don't know. I found that quite fascinating just to see, like, I can give it instructions of like, I want the icon on the left. And yeah, it just chose good icons as well. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things and kind of unfortunate things for me that happened was I thought I'd be like a good citizen and do all of my slides like a week in advance so I don't have to worry about things. And then 2 days ago, GPT-4 was announcing like, oh no, do I have to like redo my whole presentation? Like, has everything changed? And so yeah, yesterday I was kind of panicking, just thinking, oh, like, does any of this still make sense? Is any of this still relevant? And so for any of you guys that don't or haven't seen the news, basically, yeah, GPT-4 has been announced and launched 2 days ago. And it's a pretty big improvement compared to GPT-3 that was there before. Some call out things are much more human-like text generation, more advanced reasoning, which I'll have a few examples of, large data set for training, a larger number of parameters. And there's been a lot of kind of hype and talk about this one here is that the team is working on what they call like multimodal, multi-format, so that ChatGPT can start outputting audio or video or images, other types of medium, which is going to be super fascinating to see when that fully rolls out. And as a part of the GPT-4 launch as well, there was some really amazing things that got published. So these are how GPT-4 performed in academic results. So the top two there are the LSAT and the bar exam. And it got 90th percentile in the bar exam. And my wife is a lawyer, and I sent her this image, and her response was, the human race is doomed. Because, yeah, anecdotally, she knows like how difficult the bar exam is in the US to pass that exam. And the types of questions in that exam, it's not like, you know, is the sky blue? You know, what is the color of a Ferrari? That kind of stuff. It's the questions in the bar exam are like 5 pages long, right? They're like complicated scenarios with a lot of rich detail. And you have to apply your understanding of the legal system and pick up specific details of these huge 5-page questions. And it got 90th percentile. So that's nuts. And I found this pretty funny and honest tweet from this guy who said, I didn't even get 169 out of 70 on GRE verbal when I was admitted to Stanford PhD. So people are saying that, yeah, this thing can basically just apply to Stanford right now based on these academic results. But one of the good things about OpenAI and their release is that they were very open about the fact that, yes, these are like academic results, but what they observe is that in real world scenarios, humans are still outperforming the tool in many real world scenarios. But still, wow. Cool. So there was the claim that GPT-4 had significantly improved in complex reasoning as well. So these are some examples of, I've got one on the next slide as well, of just reasoning and logic. So when ChatGPT was really becoming popular, like November, December last year, a lot of people were going to Twitter with these examples of how they tricked the system, of like, oh no, this system's dumb, look at these ways that I tricked it. So this is an example here where they say, okay, I've got 5 figs in my pocket, one fell through a hole, I took one out to eat one, but then I decided I didn't want to eat it and I put it back in. So how many figs do I have left? And it was like, well, you have 3 figs. And it was very confident that I have 3 figs, which is obviously wrong. Right? And there was many, many different examples of people tricking the system in these types of logic and reasoning problems. And with a lot of these, the ones that got a lot of likes and a lot of mentions on Twitter, with some of them, the OpenAI team responded to the threads and just said, ChatGPT is not a mathematics model, it's a language model. You guys are setting it up for failure. But then a few months later, GPT-4 is out and it actually can solve these problems. So we asked the exact same question to GPT-4 instead of 3.5, and we get the correct solution. And this is another one where I was very smug, and we had like another kind of similar type of problem where it's like, when I was 6, my sister was half my age. Now I'm 70. How old is my sister? And it goes through like this weird. I don't know what it's going through, what it's been taking, but it gets to, okay, your sister is 73 years old, which is obviously quite hilarious, especially like seeing the way it reasons like through to that answer. And I was back then very smart. I was like, engineering jobs are never going to be out of business. We're so smart. And I asked the same question yesterday and he got it right. Yeah. So yes, it is much better now at complex reasoning, which is great. Very exciting. And so with all this advancement in GPT-4, I just thought to myself, well, can I just feed this thing the entire like requirements of my app? Can I just, you know how before we went through this like kind of step-by-step process of building it out, can I just write out the whole thing and just say like, just build the app for me? And so I tried giving it a much more like detailed set of requirements where to try to get to the same outcome that we had before, but just in one go. And fortunately for us, it couldn't get there. So it basically just said, you know, like I'll give you bits and pieces of it, and then we can start working through the problem. And you tell me where you want me to, you know, help you out further. So it didn't give me like, okay, here's the entire Xcode project. It just said, okay, like here's bits and pieces, and we basically needed to go through the same exercise that we went through before. So after all that, what are my thoughts on ChatGPT, and is it coming to take our jobs? So back to the original question, can ChatGPT build my app for me and do a good job of it? And my answer to that is yes, it kind of can, but only if you can as well. Because what I observed in my experiments with it is actually the more pointy your questions are, the more detail you put in your questions, you can really guide it down a particular path of getting a reliable outcome from the tool. So when I was pretending to be low in knowledge and asking very open questions, the quality wasn't the greatest and it was kind of misleading me and taking me in weird directions. But when I started telling, I was like, no, this is the type of thing I want a view model, which uses combine, I want async await, I want this and that. The more information, the more technical constraints I gave it, the better the output was. So the way I think about it now is, it's not about, you know, can ChatGPT build my app for me and do a good job? It's can this thing give me the raw materials, right? So if like we're the builders, can ChatGPT, you know, deliver me the tiles? Can it deliver me the bricks? kind of deliver me the floorboards, and then I'll say, okay, this is where the floorboards go, these are where the bricks go, and I can put things together. So are they coming to take our jobs? No, is my answer for now. So my thinking is that these types of tools can really help people, especially through that initial learning curve. I've been going through some things myself, like learning other types of programming languages and learning other things. There were some like interesting like legal cases recently in the US, and I was just following some of the things, and I was asking like, hey, like what's this particular thing in legal sense? And it was like telling me, and I was able to follow like a very complicated legal story just by asking this thing like, hey, like what does this mean in plain English? So there's this really powerful notion that these tools can help us get through a steep learning curve much more effectively. But my sense is that really to get the maximum productivity from these tools, it's really going to be in the hands of experts and practitioners. So if you understand this platform, really, if you understand your craft very well, as a lot of the people in this room do, I see it as like a Batman and Robin situation of like, hey, like, you know, you're great at your craft, you're Batman, but this thing is here, you know, at your side, and it can help you through a lot of the mundane things that you might not really enjoy doing. And so, yeah, I think that's probably where we are at the moment. But if GPT-5 is released and completely changes everything, then that's going to be interesting. And so, like one of my other thoughts on this is, as well, is like, you know, as engineers, we don't work on things with airplane mode on, right? Like, there's this idea of like, hey, ChatGPT is this thing that's assisting us in programming. But yeah, there's also like 10 to 20 other things assisting us as well. Like, not many people will put themselves on airplane mode for productivity and, you know, try to get through a problem. We have access to, you know, Stack Overflow, GitHub. We might have physical books that we buy. And so I see like ChatGPT is like another tool in the arsenal for us that we can use to enhance our productivity. And so there's this notion here that I didn't come up. I saw this one on Twitter, and I thought it's like a really interesting way of thinking about it, is that tools like ChatGPT are a tool for human curation. And so what they mean by that is, if you find a piece of code on GitHub or Stack Overflow, not many people here are just going to copy it and put it in their code base without reading it and understanding what it's doing, right? Like, we're still going through this process of curation of, okay, there's this recommendation that I've seen online, doesn't make sense. Like, what is the quality of this code that I'm seeing on Stack Overflow? Is it feasible for me to take this approach that people are recommending? Like, how appropriate is this thing, like, for me to bring into our ecosystem? Because maybe you read about a solution which uses a completely different tech stack or something that's just not appropriate for you to use. And then there's a question of consistency as well. So, you know, today we have a lot of different ways of getting inspiration and people pointing us in terms of how we can build our apps. But as engineers, like, we are the curators of like, okay, this makes sense for my app, this doesn't make sense. And you take all of that on yourself and make it your own, and you decide like what the direction is that you want to go forward. And I think ChatGPT is like another one of these tools where it can provide us its lens, its view on like how you might want to choose to do something, but ultimately it's up to you to decide. And so, of course, one of the main reasons that I still feel that ChatGPT is not here to take our jobs is because we all know that building awesome, lovable apps is more than just making an API call, storing it into model objects, and doing a lot of those mundane things. Because if that's all that mobile app development was, then I guess not many of us would have been doing it for so many years. Like, there's a lot more to creating beautiful apps that, you know, wow your users. And, you know, that's things like thinking about usability and what is delightful, because still currently today, humans understand humans better than machines understand humans. So for us to think about like, what is something that's usable, what is something that's delightful, what is something that's, you know, aesthetically pleasing, and all those things, those are still like human-based decisions. And I don't think that we're quite there in terms of AI making that leap and making those types of, I guess, like kind of creative or human type decisions yet. Maybe we'll get there sooner than I think, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And then, of course, with these examples that I just went through, the program was giving me like the raw output, but ultimately it was still up to me to think about how I wanted this in terms of separation of concerns and if I wanted to build different layers and how I wanted to architect my app. So there was still that human element of I want to make this thing that's easy to maintain for humans, right? And that's still at the moment a very human touch. And yeah, we've always got to think of the big picture, right? Like how does all of this stuff fit into the current app that I'm working on and what our vision is for the app as well. So that's what I had for my talk today, and hopefully I didn't scare you guys too much. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any questions?
Did you try asking it for storyboards or zips or anything like that?
No, because I have sanity.
All right, well, we're going to take a break now anyway, so if you have any questions, I'm sure it's free for a chat for the next few minutes. We'll take about 10 minutes and then we'll be back with Amy's talk. So there's not much pizza left, but grab another drink. The bathrooms are just out there. Great. All right, I'll hand over to Amy now for her talk.
They even got backing music. Okay. Let's see. Let's set a timer because this is a practice talk, this one. I'm giving the same talk. Actually, not timer, stopwatch. I want to know how long this talk's going to take me. But yeah, this is a talk I'm also giving at DevWorld, which will be the extended version. And this version as it currently is 53 slides of fun and excitement. And knowing me, probably going to take about 45 minutes. So what I'm talking about today is my experience of building a cycling app. This app has been going on for many, many years. For those that have known me, it is the source of most of my talks at different conferences and meetups, and it is just a lot of fun for me to have. So what I'm talking about today is going from displaying of data to doing a replay of that data to actually live recording and showing it in live activities. So thanks to Apple for releasing that at DubDub last year. It's almost been a year, which is quite scary. And yeah, we're coming up to the fun and excitement of what will change this year. So I am Amy. My Mastodon handle is up on the screen if you care to follow me on anything social. Otherwise, I'm in both the Melbourne and Sydney CocoaHeads Slacks. If you want to chat to me there, always happy to answer questions about anything going on. So one day, as I was climbing a mountain, any cyclist will tell you that this is a very common thing, not only to be going uphill and climbing mountains, but also to just be thinking through things and evaluating what is going on. As I mentioned before, this is a work in progress, this talk. It is going to contain some missing bits, but it should be fun nonetheless. So the dream, the idea, what I am in the process of building is a single app for all of your cycling data. What I mean by that is taking data from rides that have been recorded and displaying it, doing some analytics, some graphing, some just basic stats on it and showing it to the user. That's the initial thing. The way I'm doing it is I'm relying heavily on Apple's frameworks. So no third-party frameworks apart from the one from Garmin, because who wants to write your own fit file format parser? Yeah, no, don't do that. You use the one that Garmin provides and it just works and is tested. The other thing is deep integration with platform features. So not just, hey, here's an app that mirrors our website, rather doing all the fun things like putting in Siri shortcuts and doing Call Spotlight integration and all of this amazing stuff you can do that Apple's frameworks provide. Unfortunately, there are a lot of limitations with what it is that I'm building. There's a lot of really established industry players, being Garmin, Wahoo, and Strava. There is a very common saying within the cycling community that if it isn't recorded on Strava, the ride simply did not happen. So yeah, these are the big players coming up against. When I talk to people about the app, they go, oh, can it sync my files from Strava? It's like, no, Strava purposely crippled their API to not give you any data because they're a company. They sell your data to other people. That's how they make money. And you've also got your physical devices and their limitations in there. If anyone's been out cycling in the Australian summer, you'll know that trying to read a phone that is mounted on your handlebars is just not going to happen. The phones get better every year. Yay, thank you. But still, there is so much glare that you just can't read them as you go along. Also, Apple Watch itself has limitations. You will notice I am using the Apple Watch Ultra, which has an amazing battery life and is the first one to really sort of provide enough for cyclists to survive like an 8-hour ride, going out all day, doing gravel, bikepacking, whatever you want, and still be able to record all of your data. Cool. Limitations, got a lot. You do have to love them. What has been done so far? So this is what I've built at the moment. Since the first version went out years ago, it has handled importing of .fit files. Again, that's something established in the community, in the industry. These files contain all of your readings from stuff like your GPS and any sort of power meters, cadence sensors, heart rate sensors, stuff like that. One of the features I added in recently was replaying of rides. So actually sort of seeing step by step what the values were as far as heart rate, power, cadence, elevation, incline, all of that stuff where you were on a map from the comfort of an armchair, just sort of being able to scroll or scrub back and forth through it and start comparing data, which is a really powerful feature. Cool. Okay, let's talk about importing files. As I said before, and we'll say many times again, the Garmin .fit file format is a work of art, but it is designed for very, very limited embedded systems, being a cycling computer. And that cycling computer sort of takes data from a whole heap of different sources and puts it into a very compressed format. The format itself has been around for years, so it has had to sort of go like be workable on very, very limited systems. So you're dealing with byte indexes and stuff like that. When you then get into Swift UI land, Apple makes it super easy to present a file picker, which is what we see here. We are showing just the standard open document window. In this case, it is for macOS. Other situations, if you're on iOS or iPadOS devices, you'll see the appropriate file picker there, which is really, really nice. You tell it what file formats to allow, in this case, .fit, because actually setting up and maintaining and configuring all of these file extensions and permissions is a nightmare, and you often find macOS just completely forgets about it, or iOS. You also throw .data in there because they're binary files, and that will just cover everything. Yep, which is pretty cool. Not going to go into the details of taking the file from a fit to something for core data, something for CloudKit and display. That's out of scope at the moment. But just say, hey, we can import files. Next sort of big step after you've imported a file is being able to replay them. So here, this is what I meant by having the ability to scrub back and forth. This is a ride I did on the weekend up in Hepburn. If you think back to the first image on that title screen, a very nice gravel road, no cars around, that's Hepburn. Absolutely beautiful for cycling. But what we're doing here is we're just grabbing all of the data and using your timer publisher to step through it from start to end. But you've also got the scrubber there in case you want to jump around. Pretty cool. Now let's talk about the fun stuff. So this is what I'm building at the moment, and what will hopefully be a much nicer experience for a lot more people. And that's allowing the live recording of all of this data on your device and not having to worry about, oh, how do I get my file from a cycling computer or some weird third-party website into the app. So going to take a look at Bluetooth devices, call location, Apple Watch, and live activities. So let's get stuck into it. Bluetooth devices are, again, really nice to an extent, bits of engineering, and they have, like, sorry, trying to think of what I want to say. Yep, so with them, they're devices, so electronic ones that just advertise and publish data via an established protocol. Typically, it is Bluetooth LE, so Bluetooth low energy, meaning that they don't completely drain battery as you go along. Now, first thing you need to do when looking for all these devices is actually go about discovering them. So what you do is you have a called Bluetooth Central Manager there, and with this manager, you set up an appropriate delegate. Yes, it's code on a screen. It's pretty weird unless you understand the context. I'll give you a little bit of context, but suffice to say, probably don't rely on this to copy down or anything like that. This is here as a prompt to show you what is required in order to go about doing all this stuff. So once you've got your CB Central Manager configured and created, you set a delegate to it, and you call the method scan for peripherals. With this function, you pass in a set of services. an array of service UUIDs, and that will say these are the types of Bluetooth devices that you want to look for. Saying types is slightly ambiguous in that you're looking for devices that advertise the service, and a device can have multiple services that it advertises. For cycling apps, and my one in particular, looking for stuff like the cycling speed and cadence is a popular one. The cycling power is another. You've got your heart rate in there as well. They're the sort of main ones that everyone is going to rely on. So they're the ones being listened for. Once you do that, we've then in the delegate method, which is also there on screen, we just sort of see what has been discovered and we do some logic based on it. In this case, we're going, hey, let's persist it somewhere so we can display it on screen and stuff like that, track what has been connected to and what not. Another good thing to do is if you've previously connected to a device, you would want to then reconnect to it once it has been discovered. So keep somewhere in your app a list of all of those UUIDs. Now the UUID, as a bit of trivia, is a unique pairing between the device running your app and your actual Bluetooth device. So if you've got an app like mine where it has a Mac OS and an iOS target, the Mac OS will have a different UUID pair between the device and the app than iOS. Something to look out for. So you can't really store these UUIDs in iCloud key value. You would want to store them locally. User defaults tends to be a good way to do it. Cool. Okay, we have discovered our devices. Yay, awesome. Now we want to connect to them. Again, somehow in our UI, we say tap on a button and it connects. We tell the manager to connect to the peripheral. And then another delegate method gets called saying, hey, we have now connected to it. So you go do a whole heap of logic. Here we're doing stuff like persisting that UUID relation. And we're also going about and saying, hey, let's start discovering what the services and everything on the device are. When the device gets discovered, it will give some very basic info around the services as far as the service UUID. Now, the service UUID is defined in the specification, and that's the same one you use when you want to do the searching for your devices. So you know what those services are, but the actual CV peripheral, which is the object that Apple gives you, doesn't have the services property actually populated at the connection point in time. You then need to go off and say to the peripheral, please go and discover all of your services, which is what we have here. You need to set a delegate on the peripheral. You then say discover services. If you pass in nil, it will discover all of the services rather than a limited set. And you get this delegate method called. Now the delegate method will return you a new peripheral instance with the service, it will return this peripheral instance with the services populated. that then allows you to iterate over those services and get the characteristics. Now, the characteristics are what you ultimately want, as that's what is providing your data in them. Yay, this is a lot of really, really complex stuff, which gets made super easy by frameworks and everything. But it's actually pretty cool as far as how all of the interactions go. Cool, okay. Characteristics. What we're doing here is we're now going, okay, get all of these characteristics and persist them somewhere. But we also want to do this thing called set notify. What set notify does is this is the magic that will allow us to listen to data being sent by the device. So the characteristic is defined by specification. You have multiple characteristics for a service, multiple services for a device. You see the sort of big picture of what a Bluetooth device is. Some of the characteristics are a read, where you're just getting the predefined and preset value. Others, like your heart rate or your power measurement or your cadence or anything like that, comes by a notification. So once you have set notified to true on the peripheral, you then get this delegate method called here. Did update value for. Yep, cool. And you get some raw data. The raw data is when things start to get really, really fun. And so you get raw data. This raw data is designed to be super sort of compressed and contain a lot of information in a very, very small amount of data. So you're typically going to have to deal with byte indexes and values that sort of overrun and overlap. Now, with all of the Bluetooth stuff, 99% of the devices you interact with are going to be defined by an actual specification. And then you have the other stuff which the manufacturers just put in for fun and games and causes you nightmares and spending heaps of money. So what we're seeing here is we're just looking at the characteristic which gets returned, and then based on that characteristic, appropriately handling the data, and then sending our calculated result, so say our heart rate measurement or our power measurement, back upstream into the app so it can be stored, displayed, and whatnot. In the formatters themselves, what we're seeing here is going through all of the different bytes, looking at what's available, and then extracting the data. One of the common gotchas here is you might only be interested in, say, 1 or 2 bits of the data, say your cadence values and your power values. But because of the structure of it, you need to iterate through and extract everything that is there so that when you get down to the cadence values at the end, those values are available and you're not trying to read them from other areas in the byte array. You're going to get those values. Little bit of trivia again for stuff like the cadence values. Your time since last crank event will be returned in increments of 1/128th of a second in a integer value that wraps around. So you then have to look at it and go, okay, here is my value here, my next value is here. Oops, it's actually behind, so I now need to go It's through to the end, plus this extra little bit. And the same with the number of crank revolutions, where at some point it'll just overlap and you need to account for that. Which is a nightmare to work with, because you have to assume all of this logic and fun and games when you go from a value that is sent by a Bluetooth device through to a value you are showing the user. We also want to make sure that we are unit testing this, because unit tests are awesome and they prove our logic and they make sure that everything is good. So here, what we're doing is we're just getting a byte array and converting it to data, passing it through our formatter, looking at the data as a result, and we can prove that for a given input, we have the right output. Yay, Bluetooth is now working. Woo! Fun times. Take a break. We are 23 minutes in. What? That doesn't seem right. Yep, 24 minutes now. Okay, now we get to some more fun stuff, because Bluetooth devices, they don't do GPS, do they? You need GPS from another source, in this case, core location. Now, as a lot of iOS developers have dealt with core location, it gives us stuff like our GPS, our elevation, our accuracy, and a whole heap of stuff. And this section is coming in default, which is to say, I ran out of time for doing the slides for this particular section. So if you get a chance, please come along to my talk at DevWorld, and I will expand upon what is here. Cool. Next one, Apple Watch, because, hey, not everyone has a proper heart rate strap. What if someone only has an Apple Watch? And with that, they want to use that as their source of heart rate information to be able to be stored, displayed, analyzed in the app. Again, I ran out of time, I'm sorry. All of this stuff is super, super interesting and a lot of fun. With the Apple Watch stuff, you get to have fun with HealthKit, which again does some really crazy stuff, but it is a lot of fun to work with. Cool, okay. Live activities, yay! This is all of the amazing, like, this was my highlight of last year, is looking at live activities and what is capable with them. They are glanceable and they appear on your lock screen. So pretty much, if you've got a phone or another iOS device on a handlebar, you don't want to have your full app there draining all of your battery power and stuff. You just want to have it there so it can lock, but still have stuff like your speed, your heart rate, your power, all of your essential information shown on the device that you can look at and go, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing as far as effort in this segment, up this climb, across the sprint, whatever it is that you're doing at that time. Cool. Also, Dynamic Island. If you've got an indoor trainer, Dynamic Island is something that's going to be a lot of fun, because you don't want to tie up your phone while you're on the trainer for all of your display output. You want to just be able to condense that information down into the Dynamic Island. And if you're like doom scrolling through Mastodon or some other unnamed social service, you want to be able to still get an idea that your activity is still going and interact with it if you want, without completely switching focus across to it. Cool. Okay. Yep. These graphics I stole from Apple's website some time back. And these slides I stole from a talk I did previously over in Tokyo, because hey, a girl loves to travel and it is so much fun. And yay, awesome. Cool. Okay. Implementing live activities and all that. They are done as widgets, which means it needs to be Swift UI. They sit in the widget bundle. You need to say to the info plist, hey, this app is going to support live activities. Because live activities only came in iOS 16.1, we need to do if available checks if your app also supports previous versions. If, like me, is just try and force the users to update, you forgo the if available checks and you just update the minimum target.
The dream.
Yes, it is the dream. I don't have to listen to some product owner. I say, okay, we're updating now. Cool. Okay. When you are building the UI for your live activity, this is how it's done. If you want to put the availability checks in there, but you're defining a struct, which is the live activity widget. The body of it is some form of widget configuration. Side note, configurations and the sort of concept around configurations is absolutely amazing. In my day-to-day client work, we use them a lot, but also Apple's platforms use them a lot. And it's really, really good in that it's providing static data to a view or something like that in order to build and construct it and say, hey, this is everything going on. Cool. Okay. Activity configuration, in this case, for a custom type being what I've called workout activity attributes. These that's the type. Then we've got a completion block in there going, okay, when it decides to display it, we're creating a particular view. Here for simplicity, I'm just dividing it up into two functions, and you're passing in the state of the context to this to these views in order to display them. Cool. Okay. Attributes and configurations. So we sort of glossed over what these attributes are. Now let's go a bit more in depth. When thinking about what a live activity is, you've probably got a whole heap of static data and then a whole heap of data which would be updated at a particular interval or haphazardly at some point. So you've got your static stuff, which is your main attributes, might be like a title string or who a delivery driver is or something like that. And then you have your updated information. In this case would be, for me, stuff like your speed, your cadence, your power, anything like that, that constantly gets updated. And all of this needs to conform to activity attributes as the type, and away we go. Again, going back to that initial view widget being set up, we are just making use of it in our live activities. Cool. Okay, so that is the setup of all of your data in a live activity and the setup of the view, being very hand wavy here in magical. Yeah, it's okay. Now, we get to how do you actually start triggering this from within your app to say, okay, live activity, go ahead and update yourself. One option is a push notification, and that's good for something like delivery driver updates or sports score updates, stuff like that, where something happens completely separate from the device. Server gets notified, your app gets notified by push notification saying, hey, go and redisplay the world. Whereas for my context of cycling data and showing it, everything is being captured on the device. So I need to be able to say to the live activity, hey, here is all of your new data. This is what we have here. When we start the activity, we need to sort of persist it somewhere. Once it's persisted, we can then be calling it time and time again when our data updates and going, hey, here is everything new for you to display. Cool, awesome. Architecture considerations. Again, hand wavy, because my app is probably very different from your app. And you need to think about, okay, what's going to make sense within the context of your app with live activities? For me, I need to do a lot of stuff with backgrounding of the app, stuff coming across over Bluetooth, working with extensions like Apple Watch, all of this other stuff in order to get everything together and show in a live activity. So you need to make sure that your architecture is solid, that anything around that particular live activity where it gets persisted and where it's available to is going to be there in your app, and you're not trying to create 3 or 4 different live activities at once, because that's just not going to work. Okay, so you have backgrounded the app. Now what? Okay. When you actually display the live activity, you're not displaying the app anymore, which means your app has gone into the background. And we all know what happens when the app goes into the background. The tasks and stuff that are running that you haven't set up as background tasks, they just stop because your app isn't running. So that's something you really need to look out for, is your app goes into the background when you switch across to a live activity. So make sure that you're using background tasks, or you're handling background information from Bluetooth devices and stuff like that. Last bit of general advice is that my data is meant to be live. Now, remember back to when I said that cadence information and the interval between readings can be updated at 1/128th of a second. Live activities don't like that. So this thing is meant to be glanceable and whatnot. When dealing with the data and when you go to display it and tell a live activity to update, you want to then go, okay, has it been a second? Has it been 2 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever the context of your app is between the last time I've updated and now? If it has, send it off. But at the same time, you're still at the mercy of Apple, who might say, no, too frequent, off you go, goodbye. And we unfortunately do not have much control over that. So bring on iOS 17, maybe. We'll see. Cool. Okay, so what we've seen is we've gone from importing a file, playing it back, connecting to Bluetooth devices and other sources of data to showing it on a live activity, all in the space of 38 minutes. I'm in trouble. It's all good. But we're not done yet. A bonus hill climb, because most cyclists at the end of the day go, yeah, let's just head up that hill once again. So what may happen in the future is me going, I really want to do this stuff. This will be absolutely ideal for a potentially theoretical, I have no idea if it is reality or not, OS device coming up. Say you're commuting into work and you have a way of showing things on your glasses. That would be bloody amazing, wouldn't it? Be able to see stuff like your speed, your heart rate, any power measurements. But also, a lot of cyclists these days are running with radars on their bikes to tell them when a car is going to pass. Being able to see that on your glasses and just have an indication of, yeah, there's someone who is coming up rather quickly behind you. Well, being able to see that would be nice. It'd be really good. So, hey, bring on the future. The girl can dream. It's going to be nice. Cool. Okay, resources, because I've just gone through this really quickly and with some detail in some places. Good things to look at when considering all of this. The Apple Design Hig has some really valuable information. The Apple documentation, again, has newer stuff like live activities, is super detailed. Dub videos are plenty because flavor of the month. Sorry. Then you also have the rather boring stuff being your Bluetooth.com, which is all of your specifications that will say, when you're connecting to this device, this is the service ID, here are the characteristic IDs, here is the byte order of the data being returned, everything like that. And for fit files, they're on Garmin's website. Okay, thank you all for listening. It has been 40 minutes and I left stuff out. So, cool, about an hour, I think. People at DevWorld are in for a lot of fun.
Great. Any questions for Amy? Yes.
Not much of a cycle. I haven't used Strava and stuff. Is it one of the main reasons you decided to make this app? Could you feel that Strava and the other competitors didn't have that deep integration that you were looking for?
Not only deep integration, but for instance, something like Strava, they only show the most basic of information. So anything like your gear changes, which can be easily recorded and stored in a fit file, don't show on Strava because Strava just don't care about it. Radar information is another one that gets stored into a fit file. Being able to, when you look at a ride in a historical context, go, this stretch of road had 20 cars tried to overtake me on it, this one only 2, and be able to see and understand it in that way, also really good.
From a Bluetooth perspective,
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with all these devices, how generic are they, or do you need to write code for every device that you want to connect to?
This is why I said 99% of the time, they will adhere to a standard.
Okay.
Some of them don't. like stuff like your indoor trainers don't, like they do so much more than the standards actually specify. So you need to be able to work with them. And then there are also devices like a radar that don't have a standard yet. So you need to look at manufacturers' websites in order to get an idea of what the services, the characteristics and stuff like that are.
So can you, I have a user request, can you please integrate in your Reality OS, having recently been doored, to combine the Bluetooth radar detection with a low capacity impact launcher to blow the door off? That would be really popular with cyclists. Not sure about car owners.
Like, I'm not sure about the rocket launcher and the legality around that, but I would recommend something like your cyclic lights. So Cyclic are a WA company that do a combination of bike light front and rear with a camera that allows you to record it. And they tend to have the same time indexes as the rest of the data in the fit file. So you can very easily match it up and be able to go, here is the actual situation, and use that when insurance companies go, oh no, you cyclists were doing something wrong. You can point to a video and go, no, actually I was quite in the right, here it is.
Good for the police report, not great for avoiding injury.
Yes.
Got two. I guess you answered one of them already, but what was the initial motivation for creating the app?
Initial motivation was around the lack of stuff like gear changes, radar, all of that in your common services like Strava. And also Strava had done one of their pretty frequent piss off developers situations where they went, oh, we'll just completely remove this developer's API key so that they no longer get access, and we'll do it without warning and just go, oh no, you violated our service. Yeah.
Is that time? Are you able to take your data and upload it to Strava and other services by export?
Export functionality from the app, not at the moment, it's planned, but at the moment it's working from your .fit files, which are the standard format that Strava, Garmin, Wahoo, all of them use. So you can easily upload the same file you import into the app. I know, manual process, horrible.
So the last one is more technical. So you mentioned configurations. I was wondering, is there a difference between like configurations and view models, and when would you use what?
Okay. Difference between configurations and view models. Configurations tend to be value types and static data created at a point in time. With the exception of a closure that would do something like handle a button tap or something like that, they would not have any business logic associated with them. So you would tend not to see stuff like any API calls or any fetching of images or anything like that as part of the configuration. It is just the static data used to create a view. A view model, on the other hand, will have a lot more, business logic. So user tapped on a button, makes API request, returns the result, does some navigation or something like that. That is more of a view model concern. That's how I think through and rationalize it. For a lot of people, it's just a different name on a different thing, but yeah, there should be a separation between the two where configuration is static, view model dynamic.
Last one to round it out. So I can see an advantage of your app being sort of having a nice history of all your rides basically forever. Out of curiosity, how much space does your average ride take up, kilobytes, megabytes kind of thing, and how much data can be kept on the Garmin device before, I presume, it boots old records or something?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. So Garmin devices, if you think to your really low end ones being, say, like just the super small ones, very limited in their ability, they would have maybe a couple of 100 megabyte of space available. That's the modern variant of those low-end devices. Your fit files itself would be in the order of, say, 100 kilobytes for a 2-ish hour ride. So after a while, your Garmin device just stops functioning and you need to clear it out. So they can store a lot, and it's designed that way to store a lot. Now, you might think, oh yeah, 100 kilobytes isn't much, but when you're getting sub-second accuracy over that time period with lots of changing values, then you will very quickly increase that size. The other side of that is what happens when you denormalize that data into core data or into iCloud. Then you're going from a 200 or a 100 kilobyte bit of a file to a series of records in core data that would end up being, say, a couple of meg, just because of how you're structuring the data and how it's being worked out. I think for a lot of my stuff at the moment, I've got about 5,000 ride files, which on disk, 5,000 is getting up at around close to 100 meg worth of files. When sitting in core data, it's about closer to 500 meg worth of data, just because of how it's being structured. So yeah, put that onto a low-end iOS device. Sorry, Apple.
Very interesting. That's good to know. Thanks.
Yep.
Cool. Another round of applause for Amy. Cool. All right. Well, that's all we have for you tonight. Thanks again for coming out. And we hope to see you again in a few weeks. So just a reminder, we've got an event on the 28th, special event. So hope to see you there. Otherwise, get home safely and have a good night. Thank you, everyone.